Hello, my name is Shahan Ishik, and I'm talking with Jordan Chase Young, a science fiction writer and a very funny person. He is the writer of the titles like The Great Contradiction, We'll Keep It on File, Trees in the Dark, A Day at the Zoo, The Deepest Mysteries of the Game. You can find Jordan on Twitter and on his blog, ebookoftheNewSun.wordpress.com. We've had few technical difficulties during the recording, and Jordan was kind enough to stay until the end. We'll be talking about where to find ideas, quantum hermeneutics, short writing or long writing, the shapes of stories, normal, real and speculation, disciplined realism, and aliens. I'm here with Jordan Chase Young. He's a brilliant guy and a writer and science fiction writer mainly. And he's a very broad guy. And welcome, Jordan. Shall I call you Jordan?
Jordan, yeah, sounds great. No, Mr. Chase Young. I only go by Mr. Chase.
Mr. Chase.
Yes.
Mr. Young.
No, just Jordan's good.
But I'll be speaking in Turkish, and you'll be speaking English, and we'll be transmitted by some alien interpreter.
Maybe I could do what Oppenheimer did and learn it in like a couple weeks. Just like.
This is our Manhattan Project. Every person should have their Manhattan projects once in a while.
Yes, this is ours. We're very ambitious.
All right. So. I want to start very bluntly. Where did you get your ideas from? Ideas to write.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that if you're steeping yourself in enough different ideas from different places, they'll just happen on their own. Like you literally couldn't stop them. If you wanted to, it's just kind of a natural result of like the physics of engaging with lots of different disciplines. Like you're just going to get all these connections, basically. So if you read economics and then you look at art and then you watch like, an anime or something, and then, you read a novel, just naturally, I think you'll get ideas. You'll just see connections basically that other people haven't noticed. I'm pretty sure. That's every writer's experience. And then once you see interesting connections, you start to connect the connections. And then after a while, you get this kind of rich, sequence of ideas. And sometimes those are good enough to sustain a writing effort. Sometimes not, usually not, but sometimes. And then you write and then you see if it's any good. I mean, oftentimes they'll start and then very quickly realize this can't really sustain any kind of long-term writing project. But, luckily there are occasions where it kind of works out, but it's very, very hit and miss, very experimental, and just a lot of failures to get anywhere. So, yeah.
So there needs to be time in between ideas, right?
I think so. I have noticed that idea connections are lumpy. So you'll have like a handful of ideas, and then like there will be a period where you're kind of fallow. You're not really coming up with ideas. And then like all of a sudden you'll make this like breakthrough, and then there'll just be a whole bunch of ideas coming at you right away. And then like after that, there's another drought, and then you have to wait again. So it's kind of weird. It's like, it does seem to be very lumpy and very random, and sort of like you'll have like occasional jackpots, and then that will like sustain you for potentially a very long time. But then you might have completely fallow periods after. So if you ever read like a lot of the great writers or whatever, they have like a couple years where they're super productive, and then like basically not productive after that, or maybe they have like another an Indian summer or something of productivity later on, and they're productive again. But then it's like, it's like shorter, and then like, then they're basically done for a while. So it's kind of interesting.
What is the fundamental unit for writing? Do you think there's natural writing? Can you write something? Is that something that makes sense?
Yeah, so sort of like automatic writing, where you have people who just sit down and allow their thoughts to form on the page. You don't really try and control them. Sort of what you're talking about, or Because there are
I
people
think
who just like sit down and they don't actually have a plan at all. Like they just start writing automatically. Like they just put down sentences, and then maybe they're just like images or sensations, and then those images and sensations will sort of lead them down the labyrinth of possibilities to something interesting. But I do think there have to be ideas at the end of the day. Like there has to be something there that's independent of language. But I don't think the ideas have to be very discrete. So like a lot of poetry, the ideas are very, very nebulous. It's more like a lot of like modernist poetry, for example, there's like very figurative language, sometimes verging on impenetrable, but like it's capturing some kind of emotion, some kind of feeling, some kind of it's an idea, but it's not really an explicit idea. That's why it's a poem, because the writer couldn't turn it into an essay or something. So, but I do think there have to be ideas. So I mean, I guess that would be the unit then of writing. It's just ideas of some kind, big or small.
There many times there's ideas for stories or interesting ideas that doesn't fit anywhere. What to do with them?
Right. Well, what do you do with them generally? I mean, you obviously record them.
I don't know. I just maybe for someone else, for some great writer like Goethe, taking a note down, taking just an idea as a note down, might look like a poem.
Right.
But what we see is a poem, but for him, it's just taking notes. Maybe.
Right, because it's so beautiful, so shapely. Yeah, what he could. No, I agree. Like writers have aphorisms and so on, where they'll just have like one sentence, and it really does stand on its own as an idea, as a work of art, basically. Yeah, or like a lot of those like Ezra Pound poems or whatever, where he's describing like, I don't remember exactly how it is, but like the passenger train going by is like petals on a bough or something, and like. It's just like very short. It's tiny, but it's so pretty. So, yeah.
Do you think there's low art and high art?
I mean, yeah, I know what you mean. I don't care about the distinctions personally, so I do think other people recognize the distinctions, and so to that extent, and even lean into them. Artists especially lean into those distinctions, but like to me, it doesn't really matter. I mean, there's just ideas in different garb, basically. So, but yeah, I mean, there's opera that's like high art, right? And pretty much everyone knows that, like opera's, higher status socially than manga or something, but. To me, like both kinds of art require intense craftsmanship, risk-taking, communication of ideas. So, yeah, that's my view of that.
Yeah, I think it's maybe like a spectrum. Nothing is guaranteed. You can make low art great and great art low by not caring.
Okay. Right. So for you, it's actually not about medium or anything. It's actually the quality and care that's really central.
There is these separations, but they are so conceptual that it doesn't mean in the real world. I can't just point out something that it's great art. It's over a period and over many works you can say that.
So what would you consider to be great art then? And like an example of
this is excellent question that I don't know the answer. I think it's about tradition.
Okay.
Even if you are breaking with tradition, it's something. You can't just make something up. But ideas are without traditions. Let's suppose. So
interesting.
I think you are sort of you have to make your ideas live and bind them up with certain things from other people.
Right. So with high art, then it's part of being it's being a part of this sort of longer conversation, this historical artistic conversation.
It's beautiful. It's very well put.
Oh. So, yeah, interesting. I mean, a lot of critics of high art will judge work partly on the basis of how well it engages with that conversation. So, like, Harold Bloom was quite critical of writers who didn't talk to the writers who'd come before them. So he was a famous literary critic at Yale, also at Harvard briefly, but at Yale for a while. And he's kind of considered like, I don't know if you've read him. He's considered like,
I know, but maybe some other people may not know about him. But I didn't know that particular thing.
Yeah, like allusion was very important to him. If you didn't engage,
that sounds pretty convincing, actually.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think there's something to it, absolutely. But there are writers who aren't terribly elusive, who are very good. I mean, I'm reading one right now, Clark Ashton Smith. I tweeted it back a couple days ago, a brilliant pulp writer. And he's an example of a writer who's trying to do something that no one else has done. I mean, he's engaged in this like pulp era society of other writers. There's like a ton of people around at the time, like Lovecraft and Howard and so on. But like he's trying to do something as different as possible. And Lovecraft, to an extent, was also trying to do that for something way outside of what you would consider like canonicity, the canonical conversation. And I think there's a place for that too, in a way. It's almost like making a different branch of the conversation. It's almost like a spur of it, in a way. So because he's doing like very weird stuff, strange world building and his like sort of like pseudo archaic language. You can't really place where it's from. Like what is, it's got a little bit of this like biblical quality, but it also has like, very much like the romantic tradition.
It's almost like high art.
Yeah. I mean, the craftsmanship is incredible. Like it's just unbelievable level of craftsmanship, but it was the pulp era, and he was writing for pulp magazines. He was writing for, Weird Tales or, whatever. Right. And which was considered like, if you were a literary critic, I mean, the pulp magazines were trash. They were not considered interesting at all. Like, I don't think T.S. Eliot was reading Weird Tales. I'm pretty sure he wasn't. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think he cared about it. So you have this like weird split a little bit, and you could say that in some ways that is being part of the conversation because you're deliberately moving away. But it's interesting. So
in some way, you have to have conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But you could choose whom to have conversations.
Right. I mean, so like within speculative fiction, which is what I'm mostly focused on, there's actually a pretty long conversation now because we've had speculative fiction writers for a while, and like a serious tradition of criticism even. It's a much smaller fraction of the overall history of literature, but now we actually have generations of writers. Even before the pulp era, there were people who were sort of like breaking in a lot of these ideas. So, yeah, I mean, you can't really help but be part of that in some way. You're just inevitably going to be talking about, if you're writing speculative fiction, you've consumed probably just, thousands and thousands of hours of storytelling in that genre. So you're just going to naturally be conversing.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm interrupting, but I'll be interrupting you with your stuff. Can I just read something you wrote?
Sure, go right ahead.
I think this is this one short story among the ones that I've read. I think for me, my favorite of your stories.
Oh, interesting.
This is an interview with some performance assessment among humans and aliens.
I remember this. Yeah.
I don't remember. To be honest, I don't remember many things, but when I read your stuff, I enjoy it immensely.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Very kind words.
Okay, I'm reading. Your pyramids certainly look professional, and your okay, not that part. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I remember this. Yeah, it's
so weird hearing my stuff. She licked her lips. She really wanted some water. It's fine, moving on. The manager flipped the page. Under skills, you listed language, mathematics, tools, but no shape-shifting, telepathy, quantum hermeneutics, Zobokian graffiti dancing. I trust you merely forgot to include those. It's just hilarious. And more about Zobokian graffiti dancing.
Wow, yeah, I remember writing that. That was a fun story. I was not expecting you to read that or that passage. So, what stuck out about that passage that made you interested in it? What was curious?
In order to write that one, you sort of have to talk about many things. It's joking about something does not come easily. You can't afford joking without some careful thinking.
It's just fun having a conversation. Like, the podcast is a great plus, but like, it's obviously just fun talking.
We may be sorting the universe in 1,000 years, but we couldn't sort out the video calls.
Right. Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. How do you feel about the complexity simplicity thing? I mean, do you care if it's if the universe is simple? I mean, what do you think? I mean, there are some people who would, I think, relish the elegance of a simple universe, and if you could bottle physics in an equation or something.
Is it writer? I don't want universe to be complex.
I see. Because it's more laborious to write about. That's why.
What's there to me to invent? For example, a few years ago, I didn't think the aliens were real. I started writing a science fiction story. Then I changed my mind. And now I don't know what to write in it.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It's so very fucking hard right now. I have to incorporate all of your knowledge, up-to-date knowledge, and I have to invent some more. Or find another way.
So you were trying to write a story about the alien phenomenon that's kind of been grabbing people lately.
There were aliens. The point was something else, but the way I think it can't be wrong on a mundane level. For example, it can't be wrong when somebody thinks it's right. I have to incorporate that thinking into my thing.
Okay. Right. The subjective.
Not as a character, or it doesn't have to be implicit, but I have to know about it and make a decision about it.
Right. And so how did your opinion change? Was it dependent on a particular event or just your own evolution of ideas?
I don't have any judgments about anything. It's very. Let's take me as a character. I don't have any judgments. If aliens are real, they're real. I don't care. But as a writer, I'm caring very much. When I write, it matters if it's real or not, or how much I can.
I care on both levels personally, because I don't want to have any troubles with them if they're real. I don't want to get in trouble with the aliens.
Yeah, sure. You'll be held accountable.
Right. So yeah, it's funny. Obviously, we both have that interest in aliens. I mean, I will say that I tend to be. You were mentioning how the complexity of the world can frustrate your attempts to write because there will be changes in your understanding, and then you obviously you reach a point where you can no longer rely on your previous understanding when you're working on something. I think that is actually true for especially for longer projects. I find that with longer projects, sometimes partway through, I'll be like, I mean, my thinking has already changed, and I don't necessarily, I lose faith in the narrative, basically. And so it's kind of funny how you have to have a certain faith in your understanding when you're writing. And then when you finish a project, you can then change and it's fine. But it's just and that can happen at an aesthetic level, not just what I know about the world, but also just, what I think is beautiful in writing can change as well. And then,
That's very interesting.
Yeah. I've noticed that especially when I was younger, less so now because I'm a little more settled in what I like. But when I was younger, I would just ping pong all over the place, aesthetically, I don't, all of a sudden, I'm really interested in this aesthetic, realism, for example, not social realism, but just realistic science fiction and fantasy. All of a sudden, I'm really interested in that. No, I'm not. Now I want to do really funny, playful stuff that, Hitchhiker's Guide. Oh no, I don't like that. I want to do something else. So just kind of bouncing around as my idea, as my preferences change. And that's really, really tricky for starting longer stuff. So,
do you think there is any difference between writing short or long? Do you think it matters from the inside?
That's a great question. A lot of writers have said no because essentially any idea can be extended to any size and compressed to any size. So you any idea is kind of open-endedly elastic in that way. You can just make it, more complex, simpler, whatever. But I definitely feel I feel really different writing long form, as really long stuff as opposed to shorter stuff. And I much prefer longer stuff. I love the more relaxed structure of really long writing, where you don't have to. The reader will forgive a certain amount of slackness in the story if the actual texture of the story is very engaging and compelling. And because texture is something I do better than I think plot, I just happen to like longer form stuff. So. What about you? Do you prefer shorter writing or longer?
I think it actually affects the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even if Steven Pressfield said that you have to write and think big because it affects your thing.
Right.
And I'm a person that can't write very long periods of time and very long stuff.
Okay.
And
okay, interesting.
I think there are some more variables into that.
Right. So, but do you think that, like, for example, short stories are fundamentally different from longer ones? I mean, at some like aesthetic level, they're just a different beast. Their emotional reach is different. Their space of possibilities. I mean,
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But longer stuff aren't necessarily better.
Well, that I definitely agree with. Yes, definitely. Yeah.
But as a third person, I don't know what you're thinking about that. Maybe you wanted to write something big, and by big I mean what do you mean by big? Let's talk about that one.
Right. Because you can have novellas, for example, which are not short stories, but they're more novelistic than they are short story-ish. I think after about 10,000 words, I think after about 10,000 words, the relationship between the reader and the writer has changed subtly. With a short story, like generally you can read it in one sitting, but most people don't read 10,000 words in a single sitting. They kind of just read maybe like a few thousand, and then they'll sort of like, do something else, and they'll get back to it or whatever. Yeah. So I think with once you start getting to the point where there's different sittings, like you can expect that the reader will have at least a few different sittings, then you are less constrained by plot, I'm pretty sure. Because the reader's probably not holding the whole plot in their mind throughout the entire duration of the reading period. But with a short story, they're very sensitive to the shape of the plot. Like if it's even just like, if it's like 3,000 words or something, it really is it's mostly plot that's going on there, because you can't really fit that much. You can't fit that much sort of characterization and world building, and you have to be very, very, very concise, very economical. But once you get more out, once you get to like 10,000 words, I think there's a difference. And then of course, as you get to like stories that will take not just like multiple sittings, but like potentially days or weeks, like that's a totally different thing. And then when you get like series of books, I don't know how you feel about those, where you have like 8 or 9 books. Then the author is
family of books. Family of books,
exactly. Yes, yeah. Then I think it's just a completely different thing there, because I mean, people will tolerate, if you have like a 9-volume series, the amount of like non-plot material that the readers will tolerate is insane, because they're so bought in to the story. Like the characters, the world, like they're just so held by like their commitment, their like emotional commitment, that I think really interesting stuff becomes possible. Like you can just be more like relaxed somehow. I mean, I don't know if you've read The Kingkiller Chronicles by Patrick Rothfuss.
No.
Oh, excellent series. He hasn't finished it, so maybe you want to wait until he finishes it. But impossible to do that as a short story. Absolutely impossible. The plot is barely there. It's like vignettes, essentially. There's a plot. No, don't get me wrong. And the plot actually becomes a little bit more of a driving factor in like the last third. But like most of the story is very relaxed. Like slice of life vignettes. Like he's going through the university, he's talking to people, he's having these like kind of minor conflicts, and these like sort of romantic possibilities that are frothing around him, and like it's like so different from what a short story can do, because it's so open, it's so relaxed. It's like the loose baggy monster of the 19th century novels, where you just don't really have this tight structure. And I think that to me is very interesting, just because the aesthetic and emotional possibilities there.
Just like we can't be sure if the author wanted to write big when he wrote small. That could work in opposite direction also.
Okay, say more.
Something starting as a joke can turn into a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's very hard to see that from outside.
Interesting. So what examples are you thinking of here concretely?
I don't know. Maybe even Tolkien stuff is started as a joke.
Right. Yeah. No, he was just scribbling on the back of a student's paper. There was an open space there, and he's like, I forget it. Like once in a hole there lived a hobbit or something like that. I butchered it, but just this like funny phrase or whatever. And then obviously it flowered into this beautiful epic. But yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, stories are obviously, they usually come from these really weird places. And sometimes you'll have like an idea for a story. Oh, I'm going to write that. That's like a really cool idea. And then yeah, go ahead.
What's the story for you?
What is
do
the
you
story?
agree with what's the story? And do you agree with Kurt Vonnegut's phrasing of stories?
The shape of stories, yeah.
Shape of stories. He mentioned that there are only two or three possible ways to do stories. Either the character, something happens to good happens to them, or bad happens to them, and character makes it all right. Do you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you obviously there are stories where that doesn't happen, though. So I think that their existence proves that he's wrong. So, I mean, like, you'll have stories. I was actually reading a collection of Nabokov stories recently, and there's a story in there where it's just like the whole thing is a guy seeing a bunch of angels flying through the countryside. Like, that's the entire. It's very short. It's like 4 pages. It's beautiful. I mean, it's because you're getting the emotional experience of the guy who's having this kind of religious event. But like, I mean, that's the whole story. There's not an up or down, there's no like character movement or whatever. And I think it works fine. Most stories probably do. I mean, like, I think stories probably started as warnings. My guess, I could be wrong. My guess is that they were, Ugg had the brilliant idea of trying to grab, a saber-toothed lion by the tail or something like that, and this is what happened to Ugg. Like, then they started to get these adornments, and they started to like morph a little bit. And now I think but they still have that DNA though of a warning, don't they? I mean, they still have like, there's a core of it, of a lot of stories where the writer is kind of subtly warning you about something, warning you about missed opportunities, warning you about, moral sloth or whatever.
Can I just put in a toast there? Maybe the warning is already happened in the writer or author, and we are seeing the aftermath of warning. The warning is stress, right?
Say that again.
Warning is stress on the subject.
Yeah.
Define stress.
Right.
Where you could define what's causing the trouble.
Right.
We're seeing that the person has outlived that situation, either in some way.
Mm-hmm. Could be. I mean, I think so. Yeah. I mean, stories, even though they probably started as warnings, I wouldn't say that that's like all they are now or anything like that. And it's sort of like how with dreams, like they probably had a function initially that was very different from what we think about them now. Like dreams probably started like, I mean, I don't actually know this. I've heard some people claim that maybe they were like,
please go on.
I've heard some people say that they were like, maybe screensavers or whatever, like just some way of keeping the mind active. I mean, it kind of makes sense. You don't want to be like, I mean, I don't want to go outside of my zone of expertise here, but it kind of makes sense that you would have like some kind of like some kind of mental state where you're not like you're never entirely unable to respond to a threat. And then like eventually dreams became more like threat emulators, and then like over time they started to get a little bit more complex, and so they become more like vignette like in terms of almost like extra detail with how you interact with, in your social world and the dangers of doing certain things. And I think it's maybe that a little bit like that with stories where they started out as like kind of this basic thing, and then we started to just add stuff to them. We started to enrich them. And now, so to the point where, like, they in many cases they don't really resemble their initial form.
Okay, some thought just popped up. Do you think you can put a UFO in a science fiction story? A literal UFO? Because the reason I'm saying this is, actually, I don't want to speak much longer. But while writing science fiction or some very complex stuff like yours, you already raised the bar incredibly high. And from that point, somewhere unknown is incredibly complex to foresee. That may be very hard to do. Whereas if you are writing in a plain setting, like in the normal world, if your setting is normal world,
right,
you can create gates of Marvel quite easily.
Right. Gates of Marvel. I like that. That's good. Yeah. So I think what I'm getting from that is, if you're writing about the mundane world, the world that we're in, you can add speculative elements. The way that they're more intensely presented in the mundane world because they contrast more with the mundane world.
Not exactly. I think if you're writing speculative and fantasy, we'll get to that. You have to make it real. But whereas you're writing normal stuff, you have to make them unreal.
Okay.
Or raise them to a new ground of realness.
Okay. I mean, I definitely think that the best speculative fiction that I've read is verisimilitudinous. It feels like life, even if it's very strange. It definitely has the feeling of, this is an actual place with actual people doing actual things. And Tolkien, because we both obviously read him, I think was brilliant at this. I don't know if you remember the ending of The Hobbit, where he comes back from his journey and they're auctioning his stuff. That to me was like, oh, this is great, because it's just, of course they would do that. They're not just going to leave his stuff there. I mean, if they think he's dead, there's going to be this process, this bureaucratic process of, they're going to actually auction off his stuff, and he has to then deal with that problem. When he does, to an extent, he doesn't get everything back, but he gets a lot of stuff back. But like that kind of messiness, I think, that messy, mundane stuff is very powerful, very, very powerful in speculative fiction.
I'm very surprised and glad that you brought that up, because many people think that the Tolkien stuff and the Lord of the Rings are about some things, but in reality, I think they're mostly about reality. They have a sense of reality, and all the other stuff is extensions to them. Extension to that feeling of reality, at least.
Right. He did intend them to be myth, though, as well. So we don't want to forget that. I mean, he as I understand it, I think he did want that world, that Middle Earth, to be. I think he wanted some kind of mythology for England or something. And I think he kind of, to some extent, he didn't achieve that so much as a mythology for culture broadly. So that we sort of just we always reference these things, just naturally feel inclined to do that. So there's also that side of it too. It's not just trying to embody some alternate reality in text. Like he in some realistic way. Like there's also this element of myth, and it definitely, if you read The Hobbit, for example, like there are these very dreamlike scenes, these where you see the elves singing on the way to the mountains, through the mountains or whatever. I don't remember the exact place where this happens, but it's very dreamlike the way he describes it. So it's interesting how I think some of the effect of that story flows from the combination of this like unreal side of storytelling and this extremely like disciplined realism, this sort of weirdly disciplined realism that also comes along, where you have like just the mundane stuff, like just the where the ponies and so on, like how are we taking care of those and that sort of thing, like the food.
Can we say that if all you're doing is mundane stuff, it's not real at all?
Okay.
Because
the real has the numinous in it. It has the sublime.
You can't entertain about the degrees of reality, so you can't discern what's important or not, or what's... I don't want to use the word real too much.
Yeah,
but
because it's a little vague. We have to be careful about that. But and hopefully we're not talking past each other too much on that either. Well, because it is a vague word. So when I refer to the real, I mean mostly sort of like the realism of the story, the sense that the story is actually happening somewhere. It's as opposed to like a fairy tale, which can be very compelling and in its own way, but it often lacks that. It's something else. It's kind of self-consciously a story, and the narrator is usually the main character, and so on.
It's very interesting that narrator is the character of the... It's almost like autofiction.
In The Hobbit, Tolkien is definitely, like, his presence as a narrator is very strong. I was actually struck by this because I didn't remember it when I was reading it for the first time. But I recently reread it like a few months ago, and I was like, "Oh wow, this is his sort of narrator, which I suppose is Bilbo. Actually, now that I remember, but it has this like very strong. No, is it Bilbo? I don't remember now. Probably embarrassing myself on this, but
he adjusts stuff later on.
Sorry,
he adjusts that later on.
But, right. I vaguely remember something about that, but it has. But you can tell as you're reading it, like this is a story, like someone's telling you. It's very cozy, sort of tone in the beginning, like this very charming, cozy tone. But there's also the other aspects of it, which are like dangerous and dramatic, and so on.
It's almost like the famous line, "The meat is back on the menu, boys," from The Two Towers.
I hated that line. I hated it. I don't know how you feel about it, but I hated it. Because there are no menus in Middle Earth. They don't have menus. Like, why? Where do they have restaurants somewhere where they're like...
What do you think about that? What do you think? Because when you search for when you look at the writings on the Lord of the Rings, or normal people talking about Lord of the Rings on the Reddit or internet forums, the main thing you're going to see is that what happened to Frodo when he slept somewhere else, or what happened in the second age of year something. What do you think about that?
The inside baseball questions, the very the lore questions.
The questions without answers.
Yeah, right. As if this is an actual place. Yeah, I know. I'm actually curious what Tolkien thought of that. Tolkien was a meticulous detailer of his world, obviously. And the stories, I think, invite that sort of obsessiveness. They're asking you a little bit to be that, because they have all these footnotes, and obviously there's all this other stuff, Silmarillion. So I don't know. I think that's in keeping with the spirit of the story, but on the other hand, it's a bit absurd, right? Because it's not an actual place. It's just it's just completely made up. But there must be something to that we find satisfying.
Can we say that we don't actually know the ideal amount of details in a story?
Is there an ideal, though? I mean, is there an ideal? Or maybe there are just like these sweet spots where where you can have stories where, it's very, very sparse and it works. And there are kinds of stories that are much richer and they work. But maybe there's like some in between that's less powerful somehow. So what do you think about that? I mean, I tend to like a wide range of stories, and I'm okay with the wide range of detail.
I'm fascinated by people talking about this stuff. It gives me pleasure. Yeah. Just like people, I'm sure you know about that. There is an alien footage called Skinny Bob. It looks unreal.
Yeah, I have seen that.
But people are crazy about it and made pages of hundreds of pages of research. I find the whole process fascinating.
I was not terribly interested in that video because it seemed kind of pretty obviously computer generated to me. Mm-hmm. Actually, the one video I was very intrigued by. Now we're obviously straying, but I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Was the Turkish ship video, which I think we maybe talked about at one point.
Yeah.
Like a long time ago. Feels like a long time ago. Where you have the it's taken. I think it's taken at night, and you're looking out, and you see the horizon, the ocean horizon, and there's like this, what obviously appears to be, probably not, but appears to be some kind of craft, and even possibly grays or something inside of it.
Alien beings are looking at the horizon, right, thinking about ultimate frailty of life.
Yeah. You have people on forums who've studied every pixel of that image in such detail and such care. Like, you can see, like, they've taken the pixels that are purportedly the heads of the grays, and maybe even like a mantid or something, one of the mantis creatures, and like they've expanded them and said, like, look, you can see the the orbital bone or whatever of the gray, and then like here's the mouth and the just like this.
The amount of thought went into that process is incredible.
Yeah. It is. I mean, obviously, people really want aliens to be real, like deeply want this to be true. Which is kind of an interesting question in itself, because the implications of that's pretty scary. But no, it's fascinating. And like, I totally get the impulse there. Like, if I had all the time in the world, I would love to just spend hours studying that kind of stuff. So.
Okay, let me mention that I live almost like the exact location of this.
Yeah, I think you told me that. Yeah. That's probably why it surfaced in my memory.
I can see this sea from where I live.
Do you ever look out there and see if you can?
I always look at the UFOs and I never see them. Always on the catch. They're not showing up.
No, that's a bummer. They only visited it once, and they saw everything and like, okay, this is pretty good.
I'm also digressing, but we saw that event on the TVs after that happened, and everyone was interested, and then nothing happened, of course.
So
it's really fascinating.
I mean, I assume people started to get more curious and were actually going out there and trying to.
No, nothing happened. Nothing at all.
Really?
At least in the Turkish sphere.
Is there? Are there taboos around UFOs in Turkey? I mean, what is that like? Mm-hmm. Is it?
I guess you could say that. You could say that.
Mm-hmm.
People, but the country's internal affairs draw more attention to that as other interesting things.
Interesting. Have you seen the pictures of like the continents and then the distribution of UFO sightings, where you get like this smear of light over where?
Which picture are you talking about?
Oh, it's basically like a graphic representation of where UFOs are spotted. So you have like basically a darkened picture of the world map, and then like a bunch of yellow lights where people claim to have seen something.
Mm-hmm.
And so interestingly though, like the Anglosphere is where most of the observations are clustered. So like, North America, and then like the UK, Australia, you have kind of these weird clustering effects, less so in parts of Europe. And then but there are regions where like very few sightings occur. Like, like China, for example, has fewer sightings. And I've often wondered if the taboo variance, like some places having less of a taboo around UFOs and some places having more of a taboo, if that explains part of what's going on there.
It's like the first draft of a story, or first thing you put on word. It doesn't have much meaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's the beginning of an analysis. I don't think anyone is reporting UFOs in the world.
You don't think anyone's reporting them?
Just some people are reporting them.
Right.
I think many people are just not talking about it.
Right. The people who ostensibly see them and then decide to keep it to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Because I mean, what you were telling me about Turkey is very interesting to me. Because obviously there are these like famous reports of strange alien creatures that people. I think if I remember this correctly, like that people like stoned or something with rocks, and then it like I don't remember exactly. Maybe you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I sent you that one, and you said I know that one.
Yeah, that I think I heard about that first from C.M. Kozman, who's this artist author guy, and he had like this project where people were drawing them. And I was like, oh, this is really, I've never heard of it before. And it was just very intriguing. So obviously you do have these like weird events that occur.
Do you like weird events? Do you like crazy things?
Oh yeah. I love it. It's thrilling. It's because you're sort of seeing like, you're getting these like little tentative glimpses of what might be occurring beyond, like the shell of your understanding, like just these little flashes of possibility. But obviously with like UFOs, who knows what's actually going on there? We don't know yet. But the possibility that they could be true is very, very tantalizing to me, very interesting to me. So.
Yeah, we could go on for 2 hours on UFOs.
Right. And cryptids and, like ancient civilizations that used to, like the whole Graham Hancock thing. Like I don't put much stock in these things, but even a small percent of credence that they're true has huge implications. So if you put like 5% credence on an ancient civilization that preceded humans, that has enormous like influence on our world, right? It tells
the way I see it is someone like Graham Hancock is an archetype of a thing. He talks about many things. He does many things. Many of them are simply not true, but some of them are clearly true, but which some we don't know. And something like that is true. Maybe degrees of reality. There's something like that is true.
I mean, we discovered something very recently. I don't know if you saw the woodworking that was discovered that dates to like 500,000 years ago. And we think that it was part of that it was basically a log of some kind that was used in like this housing at some point. I don't want to speculate too much on that because I don't know the full details, but like I just found that really intriguing that maybe we had.
Let me interrupt you with a question. At what point you could go full crazy? Like that news is like on the verge of full crazy to me. Maybe 50,000 years is maybe okay, but 2 million years of we find out something in dated 2 million years
you go
ago.
Crazy like a Lovecraft character.
You're allowed to do what? Maybe you're then allowed to do speculate. Maybe your job is then to speculate. Maybe it's your duty to speculate at that point.
Right. Oh, interesting. Okay.
Where do we draw the line?
Right. I think we had a conversation about this actually a long time ago regarding aliens, didn't we? I vaguely remember this. Yeah. I mean, the implications for certain things being true are there's this concept of, I think it's gaining some traction at the moment, called cognitive security. I don't know if you've heard that term.
No, I've never. Please say more.
Just this idea that you have to be careful of what like ideas get into your mind. When you're like using the internet or something or social media or whatever, you have to be careful about that. But obviously that goes back, a long ways. Like, you have Lovecraft talking about how ignorance is this like helpful shelter for humankind, like preventing us from going insane, from just discovering how crazy the world is or whatever. I don't know. I think I'm pretty optimistic though about our ability to assimilate new ideas. Because if you look at like even just the last 100 years of discoveries in like physics and like just the possibility of many worlds and like how weird the human brain is, like the unconscious, the Freudian stuff. Like there's just like there was a whole string of weird discoveries over the last 100 years, and we kind of mostly adapted. Like we kind of just adapted to it. We're like, okay, so maybe there's an infinite universe, like this many worlds thing is true. Okay, whatever. I mean, we just make jokes about it now.
It's almost like almost like there's no space between acknowledgement of something and that thing being boring.
Right. Maybe that's actually helpful though psychologically for humans. I mean, I don't know. But I mean, just we've discovered crazy things about what societies can do with like, the Nazis and the communists, like just a ton of crazy ideas we've encountered. And we just kind of, adapted fine. I mean, we're fine for the most part. We have this like very high, like mimetic load of of like disturbing truths, basically, or possibilities. And we kind of are okay with it. Like even the AI stuff or the aliens or whatever, like people kind of know that there's a there, or there's a possible there. And they're like, oh yeah, they still make their tea in the morning, right? I mean, we still get out of bed, we still make our tea, we still basically go about our day.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting that normal life is a thing.
Yeah. Given how weird the universe is and all the possibilities for things to go wrong, the fact that they don't intrude that much on our everyday life is a grace. We could just enjoy life for the most part. I mean, people who don't think about any of this stuff are probably just like, they just cradle to grave, they're fine. They don't worry about any of this stuff ever, and they're fine. So, but it's people like us who write that have to deal with the dangers of knowing.
Do you think you have to know about things
in order to write, or just in general?
I'm leaving that blank.
Obviously, animals don't know much, and they seem to get on fine. But I mean, they know some things inexplicitly. I personally think knowing things is good. Yes, I'm going to be like that meme where the Norman Rockwell painting where you're standing up. I think knowledge is good. I, for one, knowing things is better than not knowing things, because at the end of the day, there are dangers out there. Actually, like life continues on fine for the most part, but occasionally it doesn't. Right? Occasionally there's something crazy that happens, and then you have to respond. And knowing that was a possibility can be helpful. So, like the people who had a more accurate view of human nature, I think, were better prepared for a lot of the horrors in Europe. In the beginning of the 20th century, they were like slightly more likely to leave dangerous places, that sort of thing, because they knew what humans could get up to. So yeah, having knowledge is pretty useful.
Can you be yourself in writing science fiction?
Yeah, I mean, certainly
can you,
stylistically. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Some writers put their selves into their stories.
Right.
Some writers just cut themselves into 2 or 3. But first thing you mentioned is stylistically, and that's fascinating for me.
Why is that fascinating?
What's style for you? Style is like seeing into the world, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Right. Style is seeing. I think that's exactly right. How you apprehend reality, and that's I think where the writer's personality is probably strongest, more so than like plot even or character. Where with plot, there's a sense in which plot is more like engineering, where there are certain best practices, there are certain inherited formalisms, there are rules, for lack of a better word, or heuristics, where you have, if X, then Y. If you have this happen, this has to follow. And so there's less room generally for authorial uniqueness. But with style, very open to, yes, it can embody your personality, I think, very well.
What does science mean to you? What do you think science is?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think science means a single thing. I think it's just a word we use to describe the institution of studying nature, and inclusive of humanity and civilization. We obviously have, as institutions of science are pretty recent. They're only a few centuries old. But you have proto-scientists, obviously, like Socrates, like Anaximander or something, who's trying to understand the heavens. So you have these scientists throughout history, but what are they doing that they all have in common? They're trying to understand nature, trying to reduce basically their load of falsehoods or misunderstandings about it. They're just trying to get a little bit less wrong about how nature works. Again, inclusive of not just actual organisms or something, but just everything, physics and societies and even language and how languages form and so on.
I have many more things, but I don't know what to say.
Well, what do you think science is? I mean, do you? Maybe a better question is like, to what extent do you disagree with that description?
I don't disagree with it, but I agree that science is not a thing. You can't just point out that. Yeah.
Well, I didn't say it wasn't a thing, but
no, I agree with you, but I think we don't know what it actually is. There are elements of it, but you can't point out that this is science and this is not.
Like if a kid's asking questions, is that science? Like there's no experiments being done. There's no institution. There's just a kid asking, is that science, basically? Or is it just inquiry? Where's the line drawn? Yeah.
And yeah, we see it in the philosophy. There are philosophies of science. We take physical as the main thing, but if you look at the quantum mechanics, it's always more crazier than you think.
Right.
We're sort of allowed to go with the crazy.
Yes. Very important to have a tolerance for that if you're interested in science.
People were... I'm thinking about the emergence of new sciences. If you think about it, that shouldn't be a thing. There should be maybe 2 or 3 sciences, and you go
like
with
natural
civilization.
Philosophy. Yeah, right. Well, I mean, originally that was kind of the idea, right? Like this, you get all these polymaths in the ancient world, like Aristotle, who are just like, they just don't care about boundaries, right? They're just trying to understand how things work. But I mean, obviously a lot of that is specialization. Like as we become more and more specialized, we understand more and more about the world, but we need to understand things in like finer resolution. Then you need a new brand. You need a way of talking about the group that's trying to deal with that very specific question.
It's almost like if you have a science for it, that thing turns out to be exist.
Sorry, say that again?
If we have a science for it, that thing pops out into existence.
In the sense that it becomes
acknowledged. For example, what's cognitive science and what's language sciences? These things were unheard of.
Right.
And they keep complexity science.
I mean, even economics was basically a pretty recent thing. Like, Aristotle doesn't care about that, like, as far as I can tell. It's something that shows up later.
Why? But why? The complexity of the universe should be, as we like to understand it, should be the same. Why does new sciences keep emerging?
Well, yeah. So
physics is physics not enough? Biology not enough?
Right. It is funny that obviously, like nature endowed us with a certain naive physics. So nature gave us through evolution like some understanding of how physics, how the world actually works, what things roll, what things drop, what things shift when you touch them, and so on. But yeah, that didn't go very far, did it? So it's only useful in very local domains, not very useful otherwise.
There were Academy of Sciences and Arts, and there are many, but when they were first emerging, I think they wanted to make art into a science, and that's how we got music theory and language theory and
sure
other things.
Yeah, right. You get a lot of literary criticism starts to flourish. I mean, you have it in the ancient...
Literary criticism is like the science of literature. Right. It was huge in 100 years ago or so.
Right, right. I mean, obviously, we have ancient, philosophers like Aristotle and Longinus and so on who were literary critics at some level. But like, yeah, you don't get really careful, really careful literary criticism is more recent for sure. I think that's good though. I mean, understanding art as deeply as we possibly can would require something like a science, I think. A science of beauty.
That's very interesting.
I mean, you could say, at some level, you could think of art as a science of beauty, but if you think of like all the different art forms, right? They are kind of like experiments in the beautiful, and in that sense, then criticism becomes a kind of appendage of that scientific process. It's like this innovation that occurs.
Community of beauty.
Right. So, yeah, no, I think probably the reason we've seen so much innovation in art within the last few centuries has a lot to do not just with sort of like artists experimenting and so on, but like I think a lot of it has been guided by criticism. These musical critics, literary critics, art critics. And the anticipation of criticism. The knowledge that the critic will chastise you if you're derivative. I mean, I think that's actually pretty useful, right? Having that daemon of the critic on the shoulder.
Yeah, we're coming from a point of that God will judge me for this work. So there will actually be people looking at this and seeing me differently. Right.
Yeah, building for the eyes of God is not necessarily the worst thing. In the absence of literary critics, if you're a devout believer, it's probably not too bad to have that. So,
okay, I have a few more questions.
Of course.
Few short questions. Then we could.
I'm having fun. This is great. Yeah.
Do you? Okay, I have few important questions, but I will skip them.
No, it's fine.
Do you write with music or not music?
I generally don't. If I write with music, it will be classical. It will generally be classical music. I don't know why exactly, or jazz. But generally, no. I do like listening to rain when I'm writing, so I'll sometimes put on, like just a loop of rain or something like that. It can be very, very focusing, actually. Because I have a very distractible temperament, probably something like ADHD. So having that like walling off of the sensory worlds with sound is kind of nice. But if you have anything other than instrumental, like if you have lyrics or something, that's just hopeless because the lyrics get entangled with your own verbal stream. Like you can't really think super. At least I can't. I mean, maybe you have different experience. But you can't think super clearly about what you're actually writing. So now if it's visual art, that's slightly different. Or if it's like something else, right? But writing is, yeah. And silence isn't bad. Silence is nice. Silence is nice. Sometimes just having acres and acres of silence to work in is good.
Very, very nice that you put this in. Do you write in the mornings or evenings?
At the moment, I write in the mornings, but that's partly because I just, as a matter of my life, how my life is structured, I have to do it that way. Otherwise, I would prefer to write in the evenings more. But I do find that I am more productive generally these days when I start early. So I'm not exactly sure why, but I am more of a night owl by nature, but like maybe it's partly to do with changes as I get older, but like I definitely feel like lately my writing is more vigorous in the morning. So it's interesting though. Because when I was younger, it was different. So anyway, go ahead.
Does going back to your titles or work on progress, does it consist as a dreadful thing, or it depends on the subject?
What do you mean by dreadful thing?
Yeah, many writers don't want to actually work at the writing.
Okay. I mean, I like most of the writing process. There are definitely parts of it that are daunting. I find, for me, I will dread the process of editing when you have to edit at a structural level. So I'm not talking about editing style, but when you have to actually, pull the jack out of the trunk of your car, and like you have to actually like get into that and like really change things, right? Like that is not fun in my experience. But most of the rest of the process, like I like first drafts a lot. I love the spontaneity of them, the surprise. I love the fact that like when I sit down to write, I will just come up with things that I could never in a million years have anticipated. Like I just, they'll just show up, and you're suddenly aware of the deeper caverns of your personality that you never really saw before. Like all of a sudden, you're just like seeing this part of your personality that was deep in you. I like also revising at the level of the sentence, so line editing. I like line editing. I like polishing and tweaking and so on. I have to be careful about that because sometimes I think if you do it too much, some of the energy, the kind of wild energy of the original artifact gets lost. But like a little bit of polishing is I think really important. But yeah, it's the revision that I dread. The revision, the first stage of revision, the first like couple of like, structural edits are very painful. I'm not very good at like gutting a scene, for example, and like writing a new scene in its place. Like I tend to think from beginning to end. So if I'm going to do a structural revision, it kind of for me, for whatever reason, I kind of just like have to start at the beginning and go all the way through it. And then start at the beginning and go all the way through it. Even if it's like, this crazy long thing or whatever. Like that's the only way I can work is just start in the beginning, go through. It's very hard for me to just like take a scene, rip it out, and put a new scene in its place. And then like all the ligaments of the rest of the story somehow connect. Like that just doesn't work for me for whatever reason. I just struggle with that.
Does it feel like an organism to you?
Yeah. It definitely does, in the sense that there's this kind of like there's this holistic structure to it where you can't really. It doesn't feel like stories are very modular. You can't like just take something out, and it very easily, I should say. So it is a little bit like organisms in that way. It's not super modular. Like if you can't just take the liver out of an animal or something, right? Like the whole thing it doesn't work. You have to be with writing. You have to be super careful because you'll often forget why some things are like what purpose something is serving because it's been so many months since you actually devised that thing. So you've kind of forgotten a little bit of like the actual logical context for a particular thing you put into the story. And you have to be super careful because sometimes you're like, oh, that's why that's so dumb that I removed that. Or like, I was actually smarter back then. Like my thinking on this was just sounder, 6 months ago. And I've just gone off the deep end. This can happen in many ways. Like one way is just when you're revising stylistically and you start to over edit or something like that, and you start to remove things, and then the tone drains out of the story, and you're just like, well, why is it not working now? Well, it's because the person who wrote that 6 months ago was smarter about this than you were. Like they were just on the ball. They knew what to put there, and now you're kind of betraying, that version of you's kind of wild but actually better idea. So don't do that.
It's interesting that you brought that up, because I feel that most of the time I forget my initial drives, why I did something.
Right. Because it's all tangled up, right? It's like
so finding an artifact to work with.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and it's tricky, man. I mean, sometimes you can revise something and make it worse. It definitely has happened to me before, especially when I was starting out.
Is future already happening?
Is this one of those open-ended questions where I have to interpret what you're saying? Creatively interpret it?
Yeah, I didn't want to ask what is future.
It definitely feels like it to me. I mean, I joked on Twitter, I think yesterday or maybe the day before, that something to the effect that reality is as big a science fiction as I am, or something like that. It does definitely feel like we're in a particular moment where all possibilities are open. Like there's just a sense that everyone has, I think, I could be wrong, or that everyone, this sort of burgeoning sense that actually, the science fiction future that we thought was indefinitely forestalled may actually turn out to be coming down the road pretty quickly. And, with virtual reality, with artificial intelligence, with space, with a lot of things, biotech and so on, there just seem to be this like strange fomenting of like possibilities, and so I don't know. We'll see what happens. Maybe it will lapse back into something like the long 1970s again, and we'll just get this like period, this very long period where we have like GPT, something, whatever the number is, but everything else kind of stays the same, and we're it's sort of like a continuation of what the status quo has been for a while. And everything that we think is like this really glittering new possibility will just kind of settle into the background of life, like VR and so on will just be like basically, just another thing we do. It doesn't actually change your life that dramatically. Kind of scary possibility, but to some people comforting. So, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think that like I am excited in a way. I'm excited about technology that I haven't, in a way that I haven't been my entire life, really. So and I remember vaguely the internet showing up, sort of mushrooming up household by household, slowly but surely, and all of the joy of that I definitely remembered well. But since then, it's been kind of barren up until like the last few years. So at least that's the way it feels to me. So.
Can we say that science fiction presupposes or makes time a real thing for the reader?
Mm-hmm. It makes time real in the sense of there being larger...
Apparent.
Yep, okay. I mean, I think that is a big part of it, right? I think that's part of what writers are trying to do with science fiction, is connect people with the idea that they're living in someone's past, right? You and I are in someone's past. Yeah. And that's actually kind of a new feeling in fiction. Like if you go back, even a couple centuries, no one really feels like they're living in the past when they're reading a story. But science fiction can kind of vividly present you with that feeling. So I think that's a special power of science fiction.
Do you think there is a difference between fantasy and science fiction?
Practically, yeah. I think there is. Practically. But it's it's a very permeable boundary. I mean, most of the great science fiction writers dabbled in fantasy and vice versa. And it does strike me that both genres are held together by a key emotion, which is wonder. So if you take, I think wonder as being really the central emotion of both of those. You could say that that there is just a genre of fiction that is trying to give you that feeling of wonder. And but on the other hand, there's also the fact that, science fiction is directly influencing technology to an extent. And so that has it has a kind of different relationship to civilization, because like the metaverse probably wouldn't exist, at least in its form, if not for Neil Stephenson's Snow Crash. And I think Zuckerberg would just say flat out, like, yeah, that was, that's why we named it Metaverse, because we're referencing the inspiration. So science fiction does have this kind of strange technologically causal role in human civilization that is kind of unique, actually. There's not really, as far as I can tell, there's not really any precedent for that in art and culture. So
that's very interesting. I'm really fascinated by things coming out of your mouth.
It's a fun conversation. I'm having a great time. You're giving me lots of things. I love how your questions are open-ended in a way that like forces me to, interpret them in my own way, and so like come up with something interesting.
Is publishing necessary?
I don't think it's necessary. A lot of writers, some of the greatest writers in history, publish very little. I mean, Emily Dickinson's one of the greatest poets of the 19th century, one of my favorite American poets, and she only published 6 poems. Everything was unpublished. Aside from that, the publishers who published those poems often butchered them. I've seen comparisons between the published and the unpublished poems. For example, I Tasted Liquor Never Brewed. Like, if you compare the two, they're, the published version is just objectively worse. Often editors, even ones with good intentions, will make unwise editorial decisions just because, they're human beings. And typically, to the extent that they do make those bad decisions, it will be, they will sometimes try to paper over originality, or sort of like, excise it from the work, because originality does look like error a lot of the time. It looks like a mistake a lot of the time. Like, if it's new, probably it is bad, right? Like, probably it is a mistake if it's new, right? Because like that's the base rate. That's like kind of your natural assumption is just, if it's new, probably it isn't good, because that's the case for most innovation, for most new ideas. But that does, at a systematic level, that can be a problem though, because then everything kind of starts to sound like everything else. This is a problem with Dickinson's work, actually, is that she was trying to do things that were quite original and interesting, but they were kind of unfashionable. They were just not this. They were a little bit too far ahead of their time, and so the editors would delete them, or change them, or make them just a little bit more accessible, is the popular phrase. So that is something to keep in mind. So like, if for writers who are trying to do really, really, really weird stuff, or really different stuff, or they're just trying to do a particular kind of experiment that's never been done before, I think publishing is tricky. certainly going through a major publisher. Smaller publishers are pretty open. Like there are enough different ones. There are enough different small publishers, like small press publishers, um, that you can probably sell something to a small press, even if it's very unorthodox. But the only problem with that is because they're small, their ability to distribute and advertise is smaller too, so it's harder to get attention. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty natural for writers to want to publish, and I think it's just like totally reasonable that if you write, if you're communicating through writing, you want to communicate with someone, right? There's someone on the other end. I think that's totally reasonable, and not just some kind of aesthetic exercise where you're just writing for yourself. There are famous writers who basically claim that they only wrote for themselves and they published for money. So this is actually Nabokov's thing. Like he just did entirely as an aesthetic. According to him, I don't really believe it, but like his claim was that it was an entirely aesthetic undertaking, and the publishing was just that was a bonus. You get money for it, but it was actually about like creating this exquisitely beautiful artifact, and publishing was totally secondary. I don't know. I think it's human nature to want to connect with other people, and publishing seemed like a perfectly reasonable way of doing that.
Do you set deadlines?
I have sort of flexible deadlines for myself. So, like, I have found that like one thing that's motivating is to have like an insanely unrealistic deadline, so that just a crazy unrealistic deadline, so that it motivates me to be like just way more productive than I would be. Even though I kind of know at the back of my mind, like, there's just no chance. There's just no chance I'm going to meet the deadline. But like, it's sort of this weird placebo thing. Just having the knowledge that if I have some sort of like guillotine that's going to fall like on a certain day, like, okay, I have to write something every day and like keep focused. But it helps to actually have real deadlines. I've heard. I have been lucky in that. Whenever I've had any kind of publishing deadline, they've tended to be pretty like relaxed for the most part. Like it's okay if like we want it roughly by this time, but like publishing tends to be it tends to be kind of slippery in terms of its scheduling. So you often have like very long periods before something is actually published. So you sometimes will have like years literally between submission and publication. Unfortunately, that has happened. So I haven't had strict deadlines, but I even just having like some expectation that I have to finish something, or else I'm going to get like it could be like a slight reputational hit or something if I'm like not delivering or whatever. Like that is actually pretty helpful.
My critics are waiting.
Your critics are waiting. Yes. They're waiting to tear it apart like a American Bully X or something. Just rip it apart. Yes.
What are the foundational works for you, for yourself?
Foundational implies like like the stuff
whatever
that
you
really,
understand that.
Yeah, right. When I was about 12, my grandfather gave me this trilogy by a writer who's not super well known actually at the moment, although he was in the 70s, named John Barley. It was a trilogy by him called the Gaia Trilogy, informally, and the books are Titan, Wizard, and Demon. And the series of novels is basically about, it's absolutely insane premise. A group of explorers discover a Stanford torus orbiting the moon of Titan, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I've read it, so I might be butchering this a little bit, but they're orbiting. It's orbiting the moon of Titan, and it's a Stanford torus. So if you've seen like these sort of like ring world type things, it's not. Now I'm getting it mixed up with the Niven novel Ringworld, but no, it's basically a wheel with spokes, but with like a hollow. You can imagine that the tire is like hollowed out, and you have you have like terrain on the entire interior surface of the wheel. So the interesting catch, though, is that the AI that is in charge of this world, which is an alien world, so it's an alien artifact. The AI that's in charge of it has been receiving broadcasts from Earth's radio and television. And it turns out that this AI is also very old and is going insane. And so the AI is essentially incorporating elements of American pop culture into its synthesis of organisms, of all the creatures on its planet, so that you get, dragons and centaurs and, all of these human creations. This AI is actually invoking. So you have like the worm of from Dune, the sandworm, the Shahilud from Dune. The AI turns that into an actual sandworm in its desert. It creates King Kong. It creates all of these strange organisms, harpies and insect beings and so on. And when I read that, I was just, I had never read anything like that before, ever. Never, ever, ever in a million years. It was just the strangest thing. I all of a sudden it like uncorked, endless possibilities of what you could do in stories. Just seeing something that strange was thrilling, and I think that was probably if there's any work of science fiction that was foundational, it has to be that one, just because that was the first that was like the first serious adult work of science fiction I read. But then you have like a lot of other stuff that I've read, as I've gotten older, obviously, like, Lord of the Rings, whatever, is huge. Dune is huge. Pretty much all the canonical works like Stranger to Strangeland and H.G. Wells's brilliant stuff. War of the Worlds, I think, was actually kind of, I didn't actually read that until I was older, but it definitely had an effect. And then, pretty much and of course, Gene Wolfe's book of the New Sun is, been pretty influential for me as well since I read it. So,
what's that like? I've never heard of that before.
Oh, you never heard? So that was written in the 80s. It's a quartet of novels about an executioner in the very far future. I think he's actually a torturer, but he does executions as well. In the very far future, where Earth-based civilization has experienced rises and falls and rises and falls, it has expanded to the stars and contracted its cosmic empire. It has discovered AI, and it has AGI, and it has done all of these absolutely incredible things. Incredible like terraforming operations and so on. Like the moon has been forested and all this, but it's in the very distant future where humanity is at a low point, and civilization has regressed to essentially feudalism. So human beings are living a feudalistic life with advanced, surrounded by incredibly advanced technology they barely understand. Including like teleporters, including cyborgs, including rocket ships, including essentially time machines, including exotic weaponry, including gene-modded organisms and alien life that's been brought from distant worlds. And the world is just a mess. It's a complete Like the entire world is a total mess. No one's in charge. There's an autarch who's ostensibly in charge, but like the actual planet is just chaos. You have because you have all of this weird like mix of ancient lifestyles and advanced technology. You can travel from one city to another, and you're just going to be harassed by some extremely exotic thing of some kind, like an alien life form, or you just don't understand your environment at all because it's so like far removed from your experience. So Severian basically goes on this journey across the continent of South America, and in this far future, and it's sort of like it maps on a little bit in terms of structure to the gospel, oddly, to the gospel. So there's a strong Christian element, which is not surprising because Gene Wolfe was a Catholic. He's dead now. He died a couple years ago. And Severian, who's the executioner, torturer, has a kind of Christ-like nature. But I don't want to spoil it too much because you might read it. So, but he's sort of, you might think of him as like a photographic negative of Christ a little bit, sort of like an inversion of the concept. I should mention there's one central problem in the world, which is the sun is dying. And it's not just dying because of age either. There's something else going on as well. So yeah, it's a fascinating
sick
series. Yeah. That one was really. It has a writing style that's a little bit reminiscent of Melville. It's very florid. So it's not concise. It's a little bit florid, and I happen to like that. So it's very rich, but definitely worth reading.
It's great to see you.
And yeah, we had a good time. We had a good conversation.
And I hope I'll see you again.
Yeah, absolutely. We should do this again at some point. It's fun.
Okay. Take care. It's wonderful to see you. I've been meaning to see you for a long time.
Dude, it's great. This is the first podcast I've ever done, and I feel really good about it. Really fun. So, yeah.